everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Aletha with Ribbons and Zippers. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad that you stopped by. You have just stumbled upon one of the lessons for this gorgeous collarless coat. This is actually the second part of the lesson. The first part we sewed all the way up to our pockets. In this part we are going to put our pockets together. We're going to sew our front and back facings. We are going to move along pretty quickly, so stick with us while we go ahead and continue to work on this collarless coat. So we're going to leave this section open, okay, and we're going to sew the pocket across 1/4 of an inch. Now that I have it sewn for 1/4 of an inch, leave your lining open, and then we're going to complete our pocket. Okay, I'm going to sew 1/2 of an inch to my tailor's tack, 1/2 of an inch to my tailor's tack, but I'm just going to line everything up first. Here's my pocket. I sewed my pocket all the way around. Okay, I'm going to cut here to release the seam. Okay, and I'm going to snip here to release the seam. Alright, so we're going to remove the basting. We're going to use the lining to cover over our seam. We need to sew a 1/2 of an inch seam allowance on our fashion fabric, easing in the princess seam. With the lining out of the way, we're going to complete our 1/2 inch seam. Okay, so here's our seam. This is the front, just the first part of the front. Here's our beautiful side seam with our pocket. Now we have to put on our facing. All right, let's go grab our coat back again. All right, so this is my coat back. Now we're just going to put our facing on. So we're going to do the 1/4 inch seam allowance around the facing, the back facing, and then don't forget to understitch. So here's my front. I want to take my facing, okay, so my facing goes like that, but of course we're going to do it on the wrong side. So we're going to do 1/4 of an inch, all right, and we're going to go down this way. Now I like to do my neck first, so I'm going to do a 1/4 of an inch from a 1/2 of an inch away, a little bit more than a 1/2 of an inch away from the shoulder, and I'm going to stop a 1/2 of an inch at the front because I'm going to cut into my seam, and then I'm going to do stitching. It's easier for me. I get a better stitch because, as you know, it's really hard when you want to do an understitch and then have to do an understitch from both sides. So at least I get an understitch all the way to the end, and then I'm going to have to stop a little before I get to the top. Now this is the neck, so I'm going to get my sewing machine needles into the neck as close as possible, about an inch away. And as you can see, I already did the understitch on my neck, okay, all the way to the tip. So that allows me to not to have to worry about the understitching on the neck and I came all the way to the end, so at least I know I have the neck done. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is you want to trim the corner here. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So you're going to press. Here's my underseam. Now before I attached my front to my back, I'm going to miter my vent. Alright, my hem is going to be 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to go over to the iron and press this. Alright, so both my hems are done. My front and my back. Let me just show you what it looks like. What I want to do is turn it back to this side, and I'm going to move the bottom part out the way. I'm going to open up the front. This is my top vent. Now that we have our seam folded here, when I created my pattern, I already made a notch here. So that tells me how far I'm going to fold my vent. So what I want to do is fold my vent in, and then I want to fold it back up on this 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here is where I'm going to create my miter. I need to measure from the width of my fold and make a mark, and how far up I'm going to go. Okay, just make sure that everything is nice and neat when it's folded. All right, so let's put a pin to hold everything. Okay, make sure it's nice and neat. I can put a mark here and a mark here, and I'm going to cut. All right, so now when I open it, I have a notch there and I have a notch there. So here is my fold. Here is my fold right here in the middle. Here's my fold. So this is folded up and it's folded over. Okay, so what I want to do is cross this. I want to cross this mark right in the middle, but I want to make sure that I touch my clips, one over here and one over there. Okay, so I crossed right in the middle here. So next thing you want to do is match those marks. So here's my middle. Okay, now notice that that's not even, but that's okay. So once you fold it and it matches on both sides, I'm going to sew along the line. Okay, so here it is on both sides. So now you're just going to cut and turn. So this looks really nice. So here's my miter. All right, it looks really good. And we're just going to press it. We have to make a seam. So it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to fold it this way, and you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then turn your seam out. Here's my miter.
Okay, before I continue, I want to work on some of the Hong Kong seam binding, like this. So this is one part of my back lining, because once I start putting my seams together, it's going to be a little difficult to go backwards and get the Hong Kong seaming in. So it's very simple. Going to use seam binding, and we're going to put the 1/4 inch on one side, flip it over, and then do a stitch in a ditch. I want to pin my seam binding right on the edge of my facing, and you want to keep pinning Do not pull or stretch. Just place the binding on the edge and pin. You see how it's right on the edge. Gonna pin it all the way around. Then sew 1/4 of an inch. Okay, and then we're going to flip it over and do a stitch in a ditch. This is what it looks like first. I stitched 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to keep that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance folded out, and we're going to fold our bias binding over it. Just like that. Okay? And on the other side, it's going to look like this. What you're going to do is just pin, and you can do it for whichever side is comfortable, and you're going to stitch in the ditch all the way down, and it's going to look like this one when we're finished. Okay, beautiful Hong Kong stitch in the ditch. Can barely see it. You turn it over, that's what it looks like on the other side. Okay, so here is my lining. I am going to do a basting stitch to hold it together. I matched it with the center back seam notches. Okay, and I'm going to baste that together. I am going to sew my shoulder seams right side to right side, 1/2 an inch. I'm going to make sure that I match the notches on the armhole, but then when I get over here towards the neck, the back neck and the front neck, this is going to be a little off. Don't worry about it, because we're going to consider our back facing and our front facing is going to fill in those gaps. All right, so this is going to be my lining. Once I get my lining together, I'm going to put my sleeve lining on. Okay, so here we are. So I have my back lining. This is the back lining. It crisscross. I have a notch that tells me the center seam. I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance on my shoulder. Okay, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then it's from the armhole towards the neck. And we are going to put a front facing and a back facing. So that's why this looks like that, but we'll address that later. I didn't go all the way to the end of the seam. I left it at a 1/2 inch because we have to attach our front facing, and we are going to attach our back facing as well. So for the side seam, I did a flat felled stitch. So here's what it looks like. It's a flat felled stitch. So the way that's done is you make a 1/4 inch seam allowance, wrong side to wrong side, and then you fold right side to right side, and then you make another 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you edge stitch it down. And I edge stitched mine down towards my back. All right, so I'm going to do this side, and then I'm going to put my sleeves on.
Here's my lining for my front, my back, and my sleeves put together. Okay, all right, so I'm going to put this to the side. Okay, so now I need to attach my front to my back. Once I put my front and back together and put my lining on, I don't want to make this hard for me to get to. So I'm going to do my Hong Kong seam on this front and the other front, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to put the front and back pieces together, which is really very simple. You just match the armholes and you sew it together. All right, as you can see, I put interfacing. Once I finished putting my Hong Kong seam binding on, then I went and I put the interfacing on the bottom. It goes across the front facing on the front and on the side front. It's 1.5 inches as usual, and we're going to fold it up. Okay, so you're going to do it on both sides. So every hem, even your sleeve hem, is going to require interfacing for the hem. The next step is to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the shoulders. I stopped a 1/2 inch away from the seam because this is my back facing. Okay, and I need that 1/2 of a seam here to attach it to the lining. Okay, so we're going to stop a half. So we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the shoulders, and we're going to attach both sides, and we also are going to attach the side seam. I pressed open my seam allowances for my shoulder, and I pressed open the seam allowance for my side seam. Okay, so now I'm going to put my Hong Kong seam binding here. I'm going to just bound my seams on both of my side seams, and then I'm going to do my front facing as well. Remember, our front facing also needs to have the Hong Kong seam binding. All right, when we come back, we're going to construct our sleeve. Okay, so now it's time to work on our sleeve. So I have a 100% cotton lightweight interfacing. It's 1 inch that I fused on my vent because it's going to give my sleeve a little bit weight, and it's going to make my vent is nice and sharp. I also have my sleeve head interface with the interfacing that we've been using. This is the Armo. Okay, these are the things that I need to do to prepare my sleeve. Now I also marked a 1/2 inch in. I always sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I have my 1/2 inch that I'm going to sew. So we're going to put our sleeve together, but first thing I'm going to do is sew my front inner sleeve. Okay, this is the back. We know that because our sleeve is higher. I'm going to turn it around so you can see. Okay, so this is the back. We know that because the armhole is higher on the back. I have my side seam marked, so I'll know. Okay, I did the same thing on the undersleeve with the 1/2 inch seam allowance because here is where I'm going to pivot. So no matter which way I put it on my sewing machine, I'll know my pivot mark. But before I do any of that, I want to sew the front. Okay, 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way up, because once I do that, I'm going to open it, and then I'm going to put interfacing on my hem. So first, let me go ahead and sew this, and then I'll show you how we're going to add our interfacing. And this interfacing is cut on the bias. Don't know if you can see how the lines. Okay, this interfacing is cut on the bias. Okay, not like the others. So let's first sew our seam. Okay, so I've seamed my sleeve on the inside, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is the back of my jacket. This is the undersleeve. All right, okay, but I want you to notice how important it is when you get to the top of your sleeve. You got to make sure that you sew all the way to the tip. Okay, so this is a 1/2 inch seam, and then you're going to sew into that tip. Why? Because when you open it, you're going to have a nice curve of your sleeve. Okay, that's important. So now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to press our seam open. Okay, so here's my interfacing. Okay, so I have 2 pieces, one for each side, and we're going to just interface this section here. Now what I want to do is I want to move my interfacing up a 1/2 inch above the raw edge of the hem. Okay, and you want to press. Okay, so here we have our sleeve. So let's put the vents together. There's a pivot point here. Here is where we're going to pivot, and we're going to continue sewing up a 1/2 inch. I want to make a mark. You want to start a 1/2 inch in, go along, pivot, and sew a 1/2 inch up. All right. Okay, so I have my 1/2 inch seam. I want to open it up, and I want to press my seam allowance open. Next, I want to grab my interfacing, and I want to lay it on my hem and then fuse All right, so once you have both sides already sewn, you're going to press it. And for this, I'm going to use my seam roll. Now, before I do, I want to clip into my seam, and I'm only going to do the undersleeve. Do not do the upper sleeve, only the undersleeve. We want to clip into that seam because we want to press open, okay? Now all vents have to be pressed towards the upper sleeve. So this is our undersleeve, this is my upper sleeve. So you want to make sure that your vent is facing your upper sleeve and then just continue to press. All right, so there you have it. So this is really nice and pressed. It's beautiful. You can already see how the sleeve already has a nice curve to it. The next thing we want to do is turn our sleeve inside out, okay? So here's my sleeve, here's our press, here's our upper sleeve. You can take your sleeve roll and you can fold in the 2 inches. So fold it in, make sure that it's parallel to the raw edge, and you can pin. Okay, so here's my 2 sleeves, nicely done. I want to now go ahead and ease my sleeves into my jacket. And first what I'm going to do is I am going to create an E-stitch all around the cap of my sleeve. So I want to go ahead and measure about 2 inches away, and you can put a pin or you can mark it. Let me put a pin 2 inches from my side seam or from my notch, and about here. And I'm going to do the same thing on both sleeves. So I'm going to make sure that my machine is set at my longest stitch. I'm going to sew close to 1/2 inch because my seam is 1/2 inch, so I'm going to come a little bit further away than 1/2 inch. I'm going to make a tail. Now what I want to do is pull on my bobbin thread, and I'm going to create ease so that my sleeve easily fits. So we are not gathering, we're just making a ease stitch. All right, so here we have it. So now that my sleeve is rounded like this, it's easily going to be able to fit into my coat. All right, so here is my side seam on my coat. Match it with your notch. I'm going to match it. So side seam to side seam, and I'm going to pin. Okay, so now that I have that done, I'm going to turn my coat inside out. And the next notch that I'm going to match is my shoulder. So here's my shoulder seam. I'm going to match the notch on my sleeve cap with my shoulder, and I'm going to pin. You're going to match all of the notches all the way around. On the front you should find 1 notch, and you're going to match that. And then on the other side, it's your back. We know we have 2 notches, okay? So find the 2 notches, just like that. Once I have all my notches matched, now it's going to be so easy for me to ease my sleeve into my coat. Here we have our jacket, sleeves set in. So I have my front, this is the side. Okay, sleeves are set in very nicely. And the next thing that we're going to do is put our sleeve cap in and our shoulder pad in. But before I do that, I want to reinforce my sleeves. So I'm going to open my jacket up, and I'm going to make another row of stitches on the underarm. So from the back notch to the front notch, just another row of stitches, okay? About 1/4 of an inch away from the first seam. So I have this 1/4 inch seam from notch to notch. I'm just going to trim it. All right. So next, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and put our sleeve head in. Okay, so this is my shoulder seam, 1/2 inch shoulder seam, and when I turn it over, you're going to see my sleeve. Okay, so what we want to see is our sleeve. This is pretty long, so it's about 15.5 inches long. This is really long, so let's go ahead and cut it down to 10.5 inches. So now what I'm going to do is just fold it in half, mark my half, all right? Now we're going to take our sleeve, all right? So now what I want to do is find the middle again, which is my shoulder seam, and we have a notch here as well. That's telling us that that's the middle. I'm going to place that center mark right there on the center, and I'm going to pin. Now, when you put your sleeve head in, make sure that the felt side is facing towards you and the smooth side is on the sleeve, okay? So then you're going to get your needle and your thread, so you want to anchor it with a couple of stitches, and then go in about 1/2 of an inch away, just above my seam, and then I'm going to go into my sleeve head like that, okay? Then I'm going to go backwards again, back into my seam, just so that I know that that's not going to move. Do not pull or tighten your stitch. All right, so as you can see, it's not too loose, but it is anchored. So you're just going to go all the way across, and you're going to do both sleeves, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to do the shoulder pad. As you can see, your shoulder pad has a little curve. You want to install your shoulder pad with the curve facing up like a cup. You also want to make sure that you fold your shoulder pad in half, and at that halfway point, just like we did the sleeve cap, we're going to place it at the edge of our seam, facing up, halfway point. Okay, another thing about shoulder pads, this particular shoulder pad wasn't designed to have a front and a back. Some shoulder pads will be longer in the back and shorter in the front. The short part goes to the front and the long part goes to the back. All right, so we want to make sure that our shoulder pad is facing up. Okay, so with the double thread, you're going to start at the tip and then just anchor your shoulder pad. Anchor it till it's nice and tight, maybe 3 stitches. Okay, you want to go in just like that, and you want to come out about 1/2 of an inch. Okay, and what you don't want to do is squeeze the shoulder pad. Don't let the thread squeeze the shoulder pad down. You just want to hold it in place. And then you want to anchor it again on the end. So now you're going to go ahead and just attach it to your seam. Do not make it tight. Okay, it's nice and loose. So just with a couple of stitches, do not pull. One thing I do want to mention is that if you take a look at my sleeve cap, I want you to see how I rounded it off, because it does have a sharp edge and we don't want that on our shoulder. So all you have to do is just take a pair of scissors and just trim around the sharp edge so you'll have a nice smooth edge. And there we have it. We have both shoulder pads installed, and now we are going to move on to our lining. Okay guys, so that was it for this lesson. We are moving right along. We are almost done. I am so happy with this coat, and I hope that you are learning a lot. In the next lesson, we are going to just be doing our lining and our hem, and we are going to be done. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've learned a lot. If you did, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so that you can know when the next lesson is coming. So with that said, I'll see you in the next lesson.